On Christmas Eve 1968, 3 men were further from home than any human had ever been. 380,000 kilometers from Earth, completely alone behind the moon, in total radio silence. If their engine failed to fire in the next 4 minutes, they would become permanent satellites of a dead world. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Anders sat in darkness, waiting to either make history or become history. This is the story of Apollo 8, the mission NASA called insane, the Soviets called impossible, and the crew's own wives gave a 50-50 chance of survival. In August 1968, NASA was losing the space race. The Soviets had just flown their Zond 5 spacecraft around the moon with tortoises aboard, and intelligence suggested they'd put cosmonauts on the next flight. America's lunar module wasn't ready. The command module had killed 3 astronauts, and the Saturn V rocket had nearly shaken itself apart. Someone at NASA proposed the unthinkable: skip the test flights and send men to the moon. Now. This decision was a desperate gamble, born from the intense pressures of the Cold War, a high-stakes roll of the dice. The plan was insanity. Take the first manned Saturn V, a rocket that had never carried humans, strap 3 astronauts to it, and shoot them to the moon without the lunar module that was supposed to be their lifeboat. There was no backup and no possibility of rescue. The mission required everything to work perfectly. The Saturn V had to not explode. The service module engine had to fire flawlessly 6 times in deep space. The navigation had to be perfect, and the heat shield had to hold. Mission Commander Frank Borman OS response when asked if he had fly it. When? Frank Borman was a military test pilot who considered showing emotion a character flaw. He'd commanded Gemini 7, spending 2 weeks in a spacecraft the size of a phone booth. Jim Lovell, bumped up from the backup crew, brought humor to Borman's intensity. Bill Anders was a nuclear engineer who'd never been to space. He was supposed to test the lunar module, but instead became the mission photographer. They had 16 weeks to prepare for a mission that should have taken 2 years to plan, training 18 hours a day until their families barely recognized them. On December 21, 1968, the Saturn V ignited with the force of a small nuclear bomb. Inside Apollo 8, the astronauts were pressed into their couches at 4 Gs as the rocket burned 20 tons of fuel per second. Borman's heart rate never exceeded 110, but the rocket was trying to kill them. Violent pogo oscillations threatened to tear the spacecraft apart. Anders later said it was like being a rat in a terrier's mouth. Then came the Trans-Lunar Injection, a 318-second burn that had to be perfect to reach the moon. The burn was a success. Apollo 8 was going to the moon at 38,900 kilometers per hour. Anders looked out the window and became the first human to see the entire Earth at once. "My God," he said, "we're really going." Ground control reminded him that his mic was open to the world. For 3 days, they traveled through the void, their spacecraft rotating slowly in a barbecue roll to manage extreme temperatures. Inside, life was cramped and uncomfortable, but the view compensated for everything as the Earth shrank to a marble behind them. On day 3, they reached the moon's sphere of influence. Earth's gravity released them, and lunar gravity captured them. They were now accelerating toward the moon with no way to stop except for one crucial engine burn. If it failed, they would either crash into the lunar surface or be flung into an eternal orbit around the sun. Mission Control couldn't help them now. The radio delay meant that by the time Houston heard a problem, it would already be over. They were truly alone. 3 men in a tin can, falling toward another world. On December 24th, Apollo 8 disappeared behind the moon, cutting off radio contact. For 36 agonizing minutes, nobody on Earth would know if they were alive or dead. The engine had to fire for exactly 4 minutes and 13 seconds to slow them into lunar orbit. In the darkness, Borman pressed the ignition button. They were flying backward, blind, trusting mathematics. The burn was perfect. They were in orbit. At NASA, after an eternity of silence, Lovell's voice crackled through. "Go ahead, Houston. Apollo 8. Burn complete." Mission Control erupted. Humans were orbiting the moon. For 3 orbits, they photographed the moon's far side. the side never visible from Earth. It was a scene of magnificent desolation. Borman called it a vast, lonely, forbidding expanse of nothing. Then, on the fourth orbit, as they came around the moon's horizon, Anders saw something that changed history: Earth rising above the lunar surface. It was a fragile blue marble swirled with white, the only color in an infinite black void. Borman, focused on the mission, said, "Hey, don't take that, it's not scheduled." But Anders grabbed the camera and took the photo. The image would become known as Earthrise. It is credited with starting the modern environmental movement by showing humanity its true situation. One world, alone and fragile, without visible borders. Lovell looked at the distant Earth and held up his thumb, realizing it completely covered the entire planet. Everyone he'd ever known, all of human history, was hidden behind his thumb. "It makes you realize," he said later, "just how insignificant we really are." The perspective shifted not just for the crew, but for everyone back home who would later see the photograph. NASA had told them to do something appropriate for a Christmas Eve broadcast to the largest audience in television history. 1 billion people would be watching. As they began their 9th orbit, the crew took turns reading from the Book of Genesis, while showing the dead lunar surface rolling past below. The contrast was profound. Borman concluded the broadcast with, "And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good Earth." On Earth, people wept, united by the message from another world, but they still had to come home. The Trans-Earth Injection was another perfect burn-or-die situation, performed behind the moon in radio blackout. If the engine failed, they would orbit the moon until their oxygen ran out, 10 days of slowly suffocating. On Christmas Day, Borman fired the engine. The burn was perfect. When they emerged from blackout, Lovell transmitted, "Please be informed there is a Santa Claus." Houston knew they were on their way back. The journey home, however, nearly killed them. Borman got violently ill, and Lovell accidentally erased some of the navigation computer's memory. The final terror was re-entry. They would hit Earth's atmosphere at 11 kilometers per second, faster than any human had ever traveled. The heat shield had to hold against 2,800 degrees Celsius. There was only one shot. Too steep, and they'd burn up. Too shallow, and they'd skip off the atmosphere into a permanent orbit around the sun. The world held its breath as the spacecraft, now a silent, plunging fireball, streaked across the sky. After an agonizing radio blackout, the parachutes deployed perfectly. On December 27th, Apollo 8 splashed down in the Pacific, its mission complete.